Hello and welcome to this one in a series of little writers workshops run by Flame Tree Press. I'm Allen Stroud. I'm one of the new authors at Flame Tree Press, specializing in science fiction. And I'm joined by Nadia Afifi, who is also a science fiction writer. So you can kind of guess what the topics are going to be about today. The idea is that we're going to talk through a few ideas in relation to science fiction in general and science fiction writing. And what we're then going to do is talk about a few topics relating to just the current situation and contemporary changes that are going on related to science fiction as things are moving forward here in 2020. Hi Nadia, how's things with you? I know it's yes, indeed. It's good morning for you and good afternoon for me. We are obviously using the miracle of technology to be able to talk to each other across a wide ocean. But, you know, we'll talk about other miracles of technology as things go. And we both just had our books recently published by Flame Tree Press. So for myself, that's Fearless. And for Nadia, that's the Sentient. So Nadia, do you want to tell us a little bit about your writing background and a little bit about your new book?
Sure. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I live in Denver, Colorado, so coming to you this morning. My first novel is The Sentient, science fiction novel set about 200 years into the future. Main topic of it is cloning. You have a woman who escaped from a religious compound in the American Southwest, tried to make a new life for herself, and when she gets assigned to a controversial cloning project, her past catches up with her, and she ends up uncovering a vast conspiracy to stop the cloning project from succeeding.
Yeah, no, it's interesting, and obviously I've read through the blurb and the information in relation to the Sentient, and you know, I hesitate to give spoilers, but Fearless has cloning in it too, so I guess we're going to be talking about cloning a little bit today, aren't we? In terms of stuff, you know, which I think is kind of fine. We'll make that work in terms of what's there. So a little bit about me. So I'm the chair of the British Science Fiction Association. This is it's my first novel with Flame Tree Press. It's my first sort of independent science fiction novel. I've written a science fiction novel before related to the computer game Elite Dangerous, but this is the first kind of standalone one that's in my own fictional environment. I think the short form description of Fearless is the Wrath of Khan meets the Expanse with a disabled protagonist as the lead, yeah, you know, it explores some of the things that quite a lot of science fiction writers explore and trying to do so in innovative and interesting ways. And also looks at the near future in terms of where we're going. So I guess that sort of leads us in a little bit to talk about some of the elements of our writing and what we've kind of looked at. So for you, Nadia, what was it about clones? Was it something that you wanted to explore?
Yeah, you know, cloning's a topic that comes up a lot in science fiction, and I've always had a bit of a contrarian view to it. Like, it's always framed as a negative thing. It can never work. When the mad scientist attempts to clone someone, it always inevitably goes wrong. And I wanted to kind of write a different kind of cloning story where the conflict doesn't come from the concept being a bad idea, but from people's irrational fears of it and people trying to stop it from succeeding just because they're threatened by what cloning could mean. And there's definitely a little bit of a feminist angle to it, because part of the opposition in my novel to cloning is the idea of women being able to reproduce without the aid of men, you know, kind of being able to clone themselves directly. And yeah, it's a very fractured, kind of polarized world, which I think is kind of very relevant to what we're seeing on the news today. But you know, you have very kind of modern progressive cities that have kind of changed with the times. And then you have a group of people who have failed to adapt to the times and have kind of retreated to a very extremely isolated way of living. They live in these compounds, you know, kind of not unsimilar to what you see in some parts of the States today. And, you know, they are very threatened by the implications of cloning.
Yeah, it's interesting in that I do think that that's certainly a concern of modern science fiction authors, in that we're all kind of looking at some of these ideas, and we're trying to explore them in ways that are a little bit more realistic than you know, something being good and something being bad, because it is, these things are a nuanced debate, aren't they? You know, they are a kind of, there are merits and flaws to different aspects of technology, and we've certainly found that as we've innovated. For me, you know, the clones are the bad guys, but it does become more nuanced as the story moves on, and certainly I've always found that some of the best ways in which you can portray antagonists or anyone that is sort of ideologically against the reader is to make their rationale plausible and to make it legitimate and to give it something that actually feels like it is, you know, is certain. The clones in my story are very much, they are the product of what was made, rather than it being about them specifically. It isn't them as being, you know, oh, I was made this way to be bad. It's more that, you know, they're on an opposite side, and the exploration of what that side is always called into question in my writing, because the ideologies are competitive. So I think there are definitely some similarities. I mean, you thinking, are there other things in would you say, in the Sentient that are specific things that you're exploring about the near future?
Yeah, I think that nuance that you talked about is definitely in the Sentient as well. You know, it kind of starts off with clear villains, and without giving too much of my book away, I mean, it does become a little grayer towards the end, where the scientists do have their own agendas, and you know, not everything is quite what it seems. And my main character, Amira, has to kind of contend with that, because she obviously is a bit of a survivor. She escaped from a very fundamentalist upbringing and kind of sees the more modern world as kind of her savior, and then discovers that world is not perfect either. Another big theme in my novel that I think is definitely going to get more traction, you know, kind of technologically, is you know, psychology and memory reading. My main character kind of has the ability to do like this elaborate memory reading, where you can kind of take a person's subconscious and project it onto a hologram and kind of use it as a therapy tool to kind of dig into a person's past and uncover like memories that are traumatic to them. And yeah, that's a really fascinating concept for me, like just consciousness in general, like what we're learning about consciousness, you know, learning more about what death really means. And that's definitely a theme I love exploring in everything I write.
Yeah, it's something actually I started to look at in my drafted sequel. So TBA news to come at some point, whenever. But certainly the idea of memory and experience driving individuals' motivations is, you know, is obviously is very human, isn't it, in terms of what's there. And kind of turning that towards some of the questions that we've kind of looked at for this workshop today. We're in quite a difficult context now. You know, I mean, obviously the situation and circumstances that everybody is going through during 2020 is very difficult. Would you say that some of the things that we're starting to see around the world, perhaps related to the pandemic, or related to protests, looking for change within society, would you say that some of those things are catching up with science fiction in general, in terms of the way in which, you know, we as writers are exploring those kind of issues?
It's really interesting. I definitely feel that way at times. I mean, I've talked to so many people who've said that it feels like we're living in a science fiction novel right now. And definitely when you look at current events, it feels almost dystopian. And yesterday in California, we had, it looked like a scene from Blade Runner. You know, the skies were orange. But, you know, I try to put things in historical perspective. I mean, you know, we always feel like we're living in very dramatic times. And while these are very eventful, pivotal times, and I think there's a lot of social reckoning that needs to happen, that's happening, they're not really unprecedented times. You look at, we've had pandemics in the past, we've had, the social movements of the 1960s, but it definitely, I think, feels like a lot is happening right now. And I think the difference that we have now is that everything is amplified by the internet and by media, right? We didn't really have that before. And it's caused people, I think, to distrust institutions and to kind of retreat almost into their informational holes. And it's been very interesting to see. And I think definitely it's kind of catching up with science fiction, but it's also giving science fiction some great fuel for exploring different ideas. And yeah, good.
Yeah, I was going to say the projection of of modern times, kind of into the future in that regard. The social issues generally are quite similar. They change, the characters change, the situations, the specifics change, but actually, some of the social situations are often quite similar. And as you say, some of the protests and the movements are, they're asking for things that were asked for before, but just in a slightly different way, and also in a from a retreated point, as it were. It is an advance, in terms of what's there.
Exactly.
And yeah, I find that fascinating. When you look at stuff, when you try and do 20,000 feet, when you try and get out of your own context and kind of look at it from from afar, it sort of does some of those things do pan out. I have a confession. So the current situation in relation to catching up, I wrote a draft of a novel about 3 years ago, and reality jumped the shark on me. So I basically wrote a book where an alien came to Earth to kill off humanity to save the planet, and decided to infect all the hierarchy of the world, infect all the presidents and the prime ministers with a virus, so that they'd all make stupid decisions, like Brexit. So and unfortunately,
or what's going on in America right now.
Yeah. Unfortunately, I got most of the way through that draft, and you're thinking that none of these things would happen, and then they happened, and so reality jumped the shark, and I ended up with 80,000 words of dross. So it does, it does kind of, sometimes it's not about necessarily us being Nostradamus, and nor would I ever claim it to be, but it does give us you can kind of look at the themes and see the ways in which some of these things are expressed, and they obviously come out from different specific issues in terms of stuff. Do you think, just following on from that, do you think that because of the current situation and because of the circumstances that we maybe find ourselves in, because of this kind of focus on different things in current times, is that going to make readers gravitate towards lighter stories or look for something else?
I wonder about that, because yeah, like I was laughing at the novel that you wrote with the combination of a global pandemic and mass stupidity, and would that be a little bit too on the nose for people now, where they want to escape from reality and that doesn't really serve that purpose, or would it be perfectly timely? I think anecdotally, just from talking to people, a lot of people I talk to are definitely going the escapist route. They want things that are light, they want to laugh, they want to kind of forget current events when they retreat into a novel, and I completely understand that. But I think there's still an opportunity for kind of heavier fare, more topical fare, if it's kind of done right. And I think, even kind of dystopian novels, and like my novel is called in almost every review like a dystopian novel. I mean, they can be impactful if there's a kernel of hope to them. And I think most like dystopian novels do have that kernel of optimism, where you have characters kind of working against their circumstances, or there's that little light at the end of the tunnel. So I guess I don't think it's impossible to write that kind of novel in this day and age, but probably in the short term we'll see a reader trend towards something a little more lightweight.
I mean,
what are your thoughts?
yeah, it may be interesting to kind of see where that, you know, because obviously the steers come from different franchises, don't they? So, you know, if we're escaping to superheroes, or we're escaping to some far-flung galaxy, then, you know, it's possible that the, you know, the steer in relation to, or back to some strange reality with elves. You know, if the steers are coming from some of those kind of tropes, it might be that, you know, that larger audiences do go there. I think for me, I think the only areas that I would say are probably currently, with the circumstances that we're in, that we would perhaps reassess them a little bit, is where they are not necessarily where they're using things that are reflective of current events, but don't necessarily treat them with the seriousness that that we now have as our experience. Because obviously, this being a global event, all of us have an experience of these kind of circumstances, and, you know, and many of us have, you know, have lost people, and you know, have had different situations which have been very hard for, you know, for people to live through, and when you see that kind of treated in a way that's not necessarily treated, you know, as seriously as it might be, then that may cause people to reassess their work. And I say this again, having come out, I've spent 3 years working on a computer game where I was the lead writer, where the main instigating event is a global pandemic from a virus that thawed out from the Arctic that turned everyone into crab people. So I'm kind of, you know, and when we were working on that, we were very, you know, we were trying to treat the material very seriously. You know, we were trying to sort of think of the fiction very seriously, but you can kind of look at it. I finished on that in sort of December to February, because the game was released in December, and you look at that in light of this, and you're kind of, oh, that's pretty close, you know, in terms of what's there. But I certainly, as a writer, I couldn't think of some of the nuanced experiences that we've had. I don't think anybody really, you know, recognized that. Certainly in the UK, I don't know if it's the same in the States, but toilet roll was going to be an issue for the for the first 4 weeks. Panic buying of toilet roll was going to be an issue. You know, I don't think people necessarily were predicting that in terms of what was there. But it is interesting, and, you know, it might be that people, I guess, move to lighter fare. Do you think, I mean, has the pandemic affected how you're working, and does it make you think differently about the way in which you write and the way in which you're teaching?
I mean, it's actually been, the pandemic has been a good time for me writing wise. And I'm very privileged and fortunate in that I work for the government. I'm able to work remotely full time. We were already kind of doing that before the pandemic, so they basically sent us home and said, stay inside. So I haven't had the same worries that other people have had. I have had relatives who've gotten sick with COVID. Thankfully, no one's passed away or been hospitalized, but it's that part of it's been frightening. But for me, I mean, it's been a very productive writing time. I think I'm someone who tends to over-program herself a little bit, you know, just try to do everything at once. And the pandemic kind of forced me to take a pause on a lot of that and reprioritize. So yeah, I worked on another novel and basically knocked out the first draft over the course of the pandemic, and wrote some short stories, and you know, managed copy edits and all of that. And it's kind of been great for me. It's definitely, I think, helped me instill some better writing habits too, like learning to block off, you know, large chunks of time. You know, I'm not one of those people who can write 30 minutes during a lunch break and then go back to what I was doing. I kind of need to be in the zone for a couple of hours to really make headway. But yeah, you know, it's funny, on social media, I've seen a lot of writers talk about how they're just kind of paralyzed by current events and, you know, just can't have the energy or the mental focus to write. But for me, writing is a little bit of an escapist activity. You know, I can either, you know, tune out, you know, what's going on around the world, or I can kind of take it and take a little bit of control over it by, you know, turning it into something hopeful.
Well, I'm somewhat fortunate in that, you know, I work in education. So, and writing has generally been a lot of you know, very, very kind of connected to my work. Less so in the last few years. I used to teach creative writing degrees, and then it was very much connected. And God, that was lovely. I always enjoyed doing that. But now now I teach on a media course, and I've just taken over another media course. The personal life changes were very much your lockdown or social distancing happened. We were unable to go into campus, and I was scheduled to teach over the summer, so everything had to be converted to online. So basically my weeks were record. This room is now all set up as a, essentially as go and record your lectures, Alan, studio. Although we have some face-to-face time that's being planned for next week, but it is at the moment it is absolutely, frantic to try and get material, to get it all organized in a new format. In terms of, so it definitely changed my life in terms of what was there, and it also, the balance of when you're away from home, because I commute quite a lot, so that almost becomes free time, I guess, in a sense. Mm-hmm. And I seem to, because I had eye surgery in, I think it was about 2010, 2011. I had laser corrective surgery, and since that point, I used to be sort of work into the evenings, and since that point, my eyes kind of fall asleep. They start to tell me it's time for bed about 11 o'clock. So my mornings became my most productive time, and and being able to spend more early mornings at home is great in that regard. But it's also, it's not, there are strengths and weaknesses. There's a lot more pressure on people. I know other writers who obviously have got families, and they're struggling with some of the management of that. And and I know that it's not just that. It can be people being furloughed and having all sorts of different circumstances around them that are changing. So yeah, it's a tricky one. I mean, I did this summer I'm nearly at the end of a draft, and I usually do try and get a draft done in the summer, and I'm nearly there. I've got maybe 15,000 words or so to go, so I've almost made it. But I would say actually I probably wrote less. Really, I think there were more things on me, which is surprising, in that kind of thinking, well, you don't have to go in, you don't have to do this. No, actually the changing environment and dealing with, how sometimes how marking changes, how grading changes, how updates in relation to campus, whether you've got to to take this protective equipment or that protective equipment. Some of those things are sort of make you kind of focus more in terms of the things that are going on there. So yeah, I would say I was quite fortunate, but because others I think have have struggled more, and and I think it is a massive change, and I don't think we're going to see anything. I don't think we're going to see anything alter back, and I think actually I don't think yet people have quite realized how it's going to be permanently altered. I think certain things are going to be not changed in terms of what's there. So
I agree with you. I think I'm sorry.
Yeah, go on.
I was just going to say, I agree with you that I think we're going to have a new normal, definitely. And I can't imagine trying to do remote teaching. So I'm sure that was a big shift, and that would definitely affect me a lot.
Yeah, I mean, I've done a lot in audio, but now it's, obviously people want because you've got to spend a bit more time on video. So now we're moving stuff to video and what have you. But yeah, it is a shift, and it's quite a, to try and get an easy, sort of repeatable process, and to try not to be quite so perfecting, because if I'm left to my own devices, I'll edit a video for days, and so I can't do that. So it's got to get out in terms of what's there. So in terms of just themes of books, so let's turn to our two lovely books, shall we? The one on your shelf and the one right here, and the picture back there and everything. So let's think about these. what would you say, I mean, we've talked a little about cloning, but what would you say are the other prevalent themes in the Sentient that you were exploring and thinking about?
I think definitely a piece of it is identity and how much your identity is defined by your past. You know, I have a main character who kind of grew up in a culture and a community that she didn't really feel completely at home in, you know, and then kind of tries to make a new life for herself in a completely different kind of environment, and discovers that she can and she really shouldn't try to, you know, forget who she was before. And yeah, that's kind of a personal one for me, because I'm kind of a, you know, multicultural kid. You know, my dad's from the Middle East, my mom is American from the Midwest, and I grew up overseas in Bahrain and Saudi Arabia. And you know, growing up, you never really felt completely at home in one world or the other. You know, and it was kind of a recent concept to learn that you're not really half and half. You're kind of both. You know, I'm both Arab and I'm American. And yeah, that's definitely a kind of underlying theme that courses through the novel.
I think for me, disability, you know, and this is a theme I've chosen to write about a little bit in, you know, in a few short pieces and other pieces, and it was one that I definitely wanted to explore here. Having a main character who's born with no legs and then finds a life in zero gravity that allows her to just be herself. And the thing that was key to me was that we see a lot of disability narratives with characters who are about overcoming that disability and trying to succeed in spite of it, or trying, you know, seeing the disability as an obstacle, whereas actually, you know, for many people that is who they are, you know, and it is part of who they are, and kind of projecting what you think, you know, what you think they should be onto them is not necessarily who they are. You know, they are their own identity in terms of what's there. And I think I never thought I could kind of write a novel like this, and I worried quite a lot prior to this that I had the writing chops to be able to put it together in the right way. But disability is it's a theme that is part of my life. It is in my immediate context, in my immediate family. The social elements associated with disability, not just the kind of the appearance elements, you know, just also the fact that you have to think about, you have to plan, you have to, you know, to sort of accommodate, you know, those things are important. And I've always felt that there is a need for more of these kind of characters that don't have this sort of triumph over their own personal adversity of, you know, of physical form, or of their trials within themselves, as it were. And so it was important for that to be something that that we could do a book on, you know, and kind of have a story that kind of goes all the way through, and, you know, and has someone expressing weakness and strength, having tough times, having good times, but them not necessarily being directly associated with this characteristic, but this characteristic is of them, if that makes sense. So yeah,
it does. Yeah, and when I read the blurb of your book, that really did stick out for me. And I read an interview that you also did where you talked about that a little bit. And I love that science fiction kind of gives you the avenue to explore that, because you're right, it is like in zero gravity, it's not a disadvantage, it's actually an advantage. And the character can kind of use it as an asset almost, rather than the usual trope of like overcoming and, you know, facing adversity and winning. So I like the twist on that.
Or using, you know, some writers, and I'm not directly aiming at anybody in that regard, but some writers might look at technology as a fixer, and so what you end up with is you end up with a future society where all these problems are fixed. But what you're actually doing, when you're not thinking about the fact that you probably have readers out there for, you know, whom their life experience isn't that, and so actually you're kind of great that your future has these things, but come on, you might want to think about identifying with the way in which your readers live their lives in terms of what's there. So yeah, I mean, it's a tricky balance, and and I don't judge or envy anybody who's trying to come up with it. But my story was very much, that's what I wanted to do, and it's quite nerve-wracking, because I wanted to do it justice, and that's quite a tricky thing. Okay, so just moving us into to some of the other things that we could talk about. In terms of audiences, and with the fact that we're spending a lot more time obviously at home, streaming services have become more prevalent, and younger readers are certainly something that I expect we both want to appeal to. What would you say that you're able to connect with them in terms of how you've written, and have you made any allowances for them? And would you say that they're an audience that you're looking to appeal to?
Yeah, definitely. The Sentient is not strictly a young adult novel. I mean, it's intended to be adult science fiction, but there are some young adult themes or things that I think at least younger readers could relate to. A character kind of discovering who she really is, and kind of overcoming traumatic childhood and all of that. In terms of the actual writing style, I think I probably have been influenced a little bit by the demand for kind of like a fast-paced narrative and kind of instant gratification. And yeah, I mean, like it's a tricky thing when you're like trying to query. Those of you who don't know, like when you first write a novel, one of the first things you do is try to find an agent and do a query. And those first couple of pages are so critical. You have to just hook everyone so quickly, establish who the character is, establish, what the inciting incident is. And it's funny when I go back and read kind of classic books, like I love, Dead Russians, Crime and Punishment, War and Peace and all of that. The narrative is so like stretched out and at a leisurely pace, things kind of happen. The reader has to invest some time in it. And I do feel like there is a trend now where there has to be constant action, and maybe not necessarily action, but constant, engaging kind of, character development. And you have to be very conscious of that while you're writing.
I would agree with that. I'd agree with that entirely. And I think that's probably one of the main themes that both of the books have, in that, Phyllis is a massively fast-paced, energetic, tense thrill ride all the way through, all the way down to that. And I spent a long time feeling very conscious of trying to max the pace. And it's very interesting. You do still, even now, you get, kind of reviews and reports where people say, oh, wow, it's a bit too slow. And you're like, and other people are saying, well, it's incredibly fast. And, and you're sort of, well, which is it? But that fundamental thing of, you've got to grab your reader. And I think that is probably the big change in writing. If you've not grabbed them early, then you've not grabbed them, and and certainly we're getting that kind of feedback from different people that you send it to, when you send it to editors, when you send it to publishers, when you send it to reviewers. If you haven't hooked people early, you haven't hooked them, and therefore they're not gonna give you the patience, which is interesting in that, I don't know about you, but I still get friends who say to me, if I say I'm watching a TV series and I didn't get on, or they're watching it and they like it, and I say I didn't get on with it, they said, oh, it gets really good after about one season. Why am I going to wait one season? And to be fair,
I feel like that's every show on Netflix.
Yeah, you can kind of see that. I mean, the thing is that I guess writing's different, or novels are different, in the the economies of scale are different. But I guess for the point of view of the audience and the reader, the economies of scale aren't different, because they're paying for a book, or they're they're not directly paying for a streaming service or a streaming show. So they it feels free, if you see what I mean. It feels quite how it's there, in terms of what's there. So it's interesting. I do think the pace thing, I think that's definitely a thing. I'd also say probably the imagery as well, because I think that there's like a cultural memory of imagery when you try and, you know, put something out there that deals with environments that are not environments that we're in now. You know, when we leave the atmosphere, you're competing with a set of imagery that is, you know, is part of people's cultural experience, because lots of people have seen Star Wars, lots of people have seen Star Trek, lots of people have seen, you know, so actually using some of that imagination, some of those reference images, you know, I think people do that, which is one of the reasons why I was delighted with my cover, because it kind of goes, no, that ship, not any other ship, that ship, you know, which kind of helps a little bit in terms of what's there. So
it's a fantastic cover. So.
Yeah. Don't you know? No credit to me at all. You know, that's the guys at the publishing house and the artist. You know, they've done an incredible job with it, and you know, it does very much.
They
you know,
have.
and
I just about mine.
Yeah, no, absolutely, yeah, absolutely, and it's something. There's something as well about a hardback, isn't there? You know, having the dust jacket and everything. You know, it kind of is quite nice, and you know, and I then, I mean, I showed you earlier, but I then built this out of this is out of pillboxes and modeling crap. So yeah, so you know, kind of trying to make that you know, does it kind of, I can't quite, can I tilt it? There we go, that way round. You know,
you're almost
you were saying?
Oh, you're almost a step away from like a Wallace and Gromit style clay animation of your story.
Yeah, you know, I mean, I've tried doing some photography on it and turning it into a 3D image. It really didn't work. It was like a piece of tinfoil, but you know, it was the thought that counts. But it was lovely to, you know, to kind of have a reference. But I do think, you know, readers are using references from different franchises and different things in terms of what's
Definitely.
there. So would you say, in terms of your writing, would you say then that there are connections between that and your other work? Does it, you know, does your writing fit into other things that you do?
I think there's definitely some overlap across all of my novels where similar things crop up. You know, I think feminism is always a little bubbling undercurrent of everything I write, and not necessarily in a way to kind of do a preachy, you know, woman overcomes adversity kind of story, but just, you know, people are placed in circumstances where, you know, gender is a factor, and you know, it's part of, you know, the wider world building, and you know, they have to overcome certain things, and little things that creep up. Media always seems to creep up, in information, and that's probably from my background as a journalism major. You know, I have a lot of very strong opinions about news coverage and how people get their information currently. And in the Sentient, there's definitely a scene with a reporter who kind of takes a scientist's work and twists it in a way that's not accurate. And in another novel I'm working on, kind of the internet age is a really big theme. You know, how it kind of has the power to you know, connect people, but also to consume people. So.
Yeah, no, and I kind of, I mean, obviously there's a connection with mine in terms of what I teach at times, and still even now, you know, being active in a creative industry, you know, being part of you know, sort of the process of producing content is a great connection. You know, it allows me ways in which I can talk to students about processes in terms of, you know, how marketing is done, how you know, how the editing is done, how the different, you know, how long it takes, the different iterations of, you know, of a draft, and so on and so forth. So there's certainly a lot of, you know, kind of work connection there. I kind of publish research papers occasionally. My last one was in 2019. I've got to write on world building later this year, which I sent a pitch into an anthology of academic papers. So I'm working on something for that at the moment. But the interesting thing is that for me, mythology is something that's kind of important, and not mythology in terms of classic gods, but mythology in terms of the modern way in which we mythologize everything in our lives. You know, we kind of we're told stuff and we believe it, and we don't necessarily verify or check it, and and the way in which connections are made between different things that aren't necessarily there. And as a writer, with the ability to present something within, a cover, whatever you put in the cover, there is an implication that it's connected. So I find that fascinating, and I find that kind of, well, if I just juxtapose this thing about something from 1844 when some event happened, and now I'm 300 years later, the reader is going to think that there's some kind of significance back to 1844, which I love those kind of things, and I think that very much reflects in modern society. We see people making those kind of connections for their own narrative purposes, or for to kind of back up their opinions, whether they're right or wrong. I think people do that quite a lot. So I find that very interesting. It ties into world building a little bit. I'm a bit of a believer that world building is not necessarily about what you do. I'm a big believer that world building is not necessarily about what you do. It's about what you don't do sometimes. It can be about what you leave, and then someone goes to bed at night and they kind of sleep and are dreaming about what it could be, which I think is an interesting thing. Okay, so I think we've kind of come to the end of the bit and piece of time that we've got allotted to this little interview Q&A workshop in terms of what's there. I think it is Flame Trees hope that we're going to do lots more of these. So hopefully, Nadia, you're not too bored of me, and we won't end up falling out. But I think we've negotiated it fair enough for today. So in terms of the other bits and pieces around the Sentient, was there anything else about it that you'd want readers to know, or you'd like to kind of give a clue of in terms of where you're going forward with the writing process after this?
I would just that's a great question. I have to think about it for a minute. I would say the blurb is kind of just the beginning of it. I mean, hopefully it'll become a series, and there's basically a wider conflict that would really unfold that ties into kind of religious conflict. One big thing, I guess, is religion is not necessarily a negative or a positive, but in how it's utilized. And that's something I'm hoping to explore in later books.
Yeah, and I would say something similar, to be honest. Fearless leaves on an ending, hopefully, where people would want to know more about the adventures of Captain Elisa Shan. So I'd love to write more about them, and hopefully watch this space, and we'll see some more books out of both of us in the near future. Okay, so I think that's all we have time for today. So I want to thank those of you joining us and tuning in. And join us again. Hopefully this is going to be the start of a series for Flame Tree, and hopefully we can talk a little bit more about science fiction, our writing, and some of the mechanics of the processes as things go on. So take care of yourselves and stay safe, obviously in these difficult times. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.